are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
I had a supporter one time with me visiting our safe home in the Philippines, and we spent the day playing with the kids, and it was just this, we just had a blast. And at the end of the day, she goes, "Man, I'm just so confused. This is not what I was expecting to see here."
Yeah.
She goes, "These kids, they're just enjoying life and all of this." She goes, "They're just like real children." And I was like, "Yep, that's because they are real children, right?"
Yeah.
But we have this like expectation that the worst thing that's ever happened to you defines you now, and this is who you are. But you're bigger than the worst thing that's ever happened to you, just as you're bigger than the worst thing you've ever done, right? And so seeing the full picture of who a human being is really important to us. So we try to tell the whole story so so it's not just like, this is you.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, Josh Williams, Associate National Director for Evangelism and Justice for Vineyard USA, talks to Rob Morris. Rob is the co-founder of Love 146, an international human rights organization working to end child trafficking and exploitation. Prior to the co-founding of Love 146, Rob worked with Mercy Ships International, directing training schools at the International Operations Center. Let's listen in.
Hey, Vineyard family, this is Josh Williams, the Associate National Director of Evangelism and Justice, and I'm very excited today to be sitting with Rob Morris from Love 146. I am thrilled to have you here in my city, New Haven. We, are in the same place, and also for you to be here today on the podcast. Can you just say hello and also just tell us a little bit real quick about you and Love 146?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It is good that we share the same city. I am currently the co-founder and CEO of Love 146, which is a human rights organization working to end the trafficking and exploitation of children. And we began this work a little over 21 years ago. So and we do that specifically through caring for survivors, kids that have been trafficked and exploited, and we also have a prevention program as well. So since 2002 till now, we've been able to reach a little over 77,000 kids globally through both of those programs.
Wow. And one of the things that I'm so inspired by is you've done this work investing internationally, nationally. I'm also really grateful that you've invested so much just in your staff and people that I pastor, go to church with, even from the very beginning, Kathy Maskell, who really served and helped. I remember one time at our home group, we celebrated a law that you all helped pass that was so influential in changing things even locally here. So your story is connected to our story, and I'm so grateful for that.
I love that.
On this podcast, We Are Vineyard, we usually just spend some time hearing about people's stories. Do you mind sharing a little bit more of your background, where you grew up, how you saw the world from your child, teenage, whatever?
Yeah, so born and raised in New York, lived there most of my life.
New York City?
Right outside of New York City,
Okay.
Rockland County.
Okay.
Born and raised there, have two brothers. And it was the classic, my mom and dad moved from Brooklyn to the suburbs back in the 50s, late 50s, and did the whole migration thing from the city to the suburbs and started a family. That's where they wanted to raise a family. And we were brought up in the Lutheran church, but faith wasn't necessarily something that was like a crucial centerpiece of our lives. It was kind of just what you did on Sunday.
Yeah.
So we went to church every Sunday. The classic white suburban family is kind of how we grew up, and great mom and dad who loved us and provided a great home and family life for us. Went through the classic rebellion years as a teenager. And during that time, I believe my oldest brother was the first one to actually come to faith in our family. And that was through the Catholic Church, interestingly.
Wow. How'd that happen?
He got connected with some friends in college who were part of this Catholic charismatic movement.
Okay.
And they brought him to some event, and he had a radical conversion experience, came home and was sharing. And, I was like, what happened to my brother.
Yeah.
You know, he's kind of gone crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom and dad were intrigued because they saw some transformation that happened in their son's life.
Yep.
So they got involved with the Catholic charismatic movement as well, and also came to faith. And I thought my whole family was going crazy. And so, so I rejected that for a good chunk of my teen years, and then got tired of running and all of that, and through a series of circumstances also came to faith when I was, I think I was 19 or 20, somewhere around there.
Wow. In the Catholic Church as well?
No, that was
Okay.
actually my parents then kind of moved out of that and started going to an Assembly of God church in the local community. And I remember my parents made a deal with me when I was in high school, in my senior year in high school. They were like, listen, if you go to church with us 10 times and you graduate from high school, we'll give you our old car. And it was like a
Amazing.
deal, right?
Yeah,
and so the old car was a 1974 Ford Country Squire station wagon.
Okay.
So for somebody who was living the party lifestyle, this was like, this is a party car. Right?
Yes.
It's a gigantic, it's like it's an ocean liner. And so I thought, okay, that's a good deal. I think I can do that, because it looked like I wasn't going to graduate from high school because I was not attending classes. So I started attending classes, and the first day I went to church with them, it was like I was on another planet. I went to this Assembly of God church because I was not used to what I was seeing at this Assembly of God church. And I remember the pastor gave this sermon on the story of the prodigal son.
Classic.
And I was enraged because I was absolutely sure that my parents paid him to talk to me. Right. So after church, I just went off on my parents. I'm like, that was the lowest of low. I know you've tried a lot of things to finagle a way to get me to believe the way that you're believing, but to actually pay a pastor to kind of like specifically and they were like, no, that's the Lord speaking. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I was so suspicious. Yeah. And then I did the deal, man. Went to church 10 times and eventually came to Christ. So, and I had a praying mom.
Okay. Yeah.
I had a mom every night, which I would be sound asleep, and I didn't even know this was happening.
Yeah.
But for years, she would go into my room and she would lay her hands on me while I was sleeping and pray that somehow God would rescue me. And her prayers were answered in a pretty radical
powerful.
way.
Parents' prayers. I always say that. So from that moment of, I don't know if it was week 7, 8, 9, or 10, but what happened next? Like, what did that transformation look like for you personally?
I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do before that. After I graduated from high school, I was a drummer in a band, so I was playing drums in a band, and I thought I'm just going to be a musician, do the classic thing. But when I came to Christ, it was like, man, I want to do something for him, and I want to do something that looks different than what I had planned. And I had a youth pastor at the time at that church that sort of took me under his wing, and he was like, maybe you should think about Bible school, so I was like, okay. So I went to Bible college and graduated from Bible college
In New York too?
No, it was actually in Rhode Island. Now it's in Massachusetts. It was called Zion, and now it's I think it's Northeast Bible College or something like that in Massachusetts. But anyway, went to college and graduated, then went into full-time youth ministry. So I wanted to be a youth pastor. I wanted to work with young people, and perhaps maybe help guide or direct young people in a direction that would be different than the direction that I was taking when I was in a bad place. So so was a youth pastor for years, burnt out in youth ministry.
Tell us that story. What happened there to burn you out?
Man, it's a great question. So ministry started becoming the thing.
Yeah.
And I started losing sight of a personal relationship with God. And I saw that happening all around me too, as, interacting with other people in ministry and all of that. Ministry was the thing. And I was like, man, I was actually really missing the original thing. Yeah. And so in that place started becoming exhausted. And then I started actually just feeling like I was missing a relationship with Jesus. Yeah. And so I left the ministry, went down to Texas to join a community down there that I don't know if you remember back in the day, Keith Green. So I joined Last Days Ministries down in Texas. Keith had ended up in the plane crash and all of that. So I went down there, connected connected with that community. And there was a bunch of like people from the Jesus movement, you know,
Yep.
that migrated from California down to like where land was cheaper in Texas. And so I became part of that community. And and that became part of Youth with a Mission.
Okay.
And I ended up staying with Youth with a Mission, was leading discipleship training schools through Youth with a Mission, then left there as we closed that ministry down.
Yeah.
Left there and joined Mercy Ships. And then I was
Okay.
with Mercy Ships for about 5 years. And then after some time, here we are living in East Texas, right? And I've been to 30 or 40 different countries. I've never experienced culture shock like I did when I moved from New York to Texas. That was intense. But after being there, here we are living in the buckle of the Bible Belt, in Christian community, in a ministry.
Yes.
There was a group of us that just started feeling this ache of like, man, what would it look like again to live in a neighborhood and just figure out what it looks like to love our neighbors?
Yeah.
And so there was a group of us that ended up looking at different cities that we thought, let's just move together to a city, plant ourselves, and just figure out what it looks like to love our neighbors.
Yeah.
And we wanted to find a spiritually dark place to go. We ended up in New Haven, Connecticut.
Hey, that's what people say.
That, right?
Yep.
So we planted a work here, a YWAM work, and out of that place, I met a group of friends. We all had this common denominator that we cared about children, especially vulnerable kids. My wife and I have, 7 kids. 5 of our children we've adopted from different places through different circumstances. So we've always had this bent towards vulnerable children. And it was a group of friends that, that we started hearing about this thing called child trafficking and human trafficking. We're like, what is this? This is happening to kids? This is crazy. And back in 2002, this is around that time that we started hearing about this, not a lot of people knew what human trafficking was, right?
Yeah.
It was relatively new terminology. The crime itself has existed forever, but the actual, terminology called human trafficking was relatively new. So we were like, what is this? And we started learning about it, and we're like, man, we each had these different public platforms through music and the arts. We thought maybe we could use those platforms to raise awareness about this, maybe raise funds for organizations that are doing something about it. Through that process of educating ourselves, we connected with an organization made up of criminal investigators who were like, if you're going to talk about this publicly, you should really understand it because it's really complex.
Wow.
It's not just a black and white thing. It's the proverbial rabbit hole. The further in you go, the more complex it gets. So they invited us to visit one of their operating centers in a Southeast Asian country. We went there to learn. And while we were there, they were in the middle of an investigation in this particular city of a brothel where they were suspected that there were children being trafficked. And they were going in, their investigators were going in that particular night that we were there, and they invited us to come with them. Now, we would never recommend an organization do that. But because of the trust that had been established and everything, they trusted us. They invited us in, and basically these guys go in undercover into these places where children are being trafficked. They pose as customers, and they have undercover surveillance equipment on. They gather evidence. They have to do a separate investigation of local authorities, also investigating them because oftentimes local authorities are involved or are being paid to look the other way, or even for protection. It's pretty crazy. So they gave us these brief instructions on how to pose as a customer, which was, man, by far the most disturbing experience of my life, to pretend to be the very thing that everything in you is completely repulsed by, right? I remember the last thing that this one investigator said before we went in, he says, if you don't think you can do this, if you don't think you can hold it together, because if you break character, you could destroy this entire investigation, don't come in. And we were like, no worries, until we went in. And we walked into this place and stood in this room looking through these glass windows where these kids were sitting there, and I still remember they had these matching red dresses on, having even the dignity of a name stripped from them. They just had numbers pinned to their dresses. And on this side of the glass, I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with predators who were purchasing these kids for sex. And I remember in that moment hearing those words of the investigator in my head, just sort of like, if you don't think you can hold it together, because everything in me was really having a hard time holding it together, right? Because instinctually you want to do something right now to stop this from happening, and we couldn't. We had to refrain ourselves because they had this investigation that they were doing, and they needed to bring it to a place of completion where they had enough evidence. And man, Josh, the thing that obliterated me was just the looks in the eyes of these kids. And since then, obviously, I've seen trauma. And trauma looks a lot of different ways in a lot of different people. But to see these kids, they were watching these children's cartoons on television sets, and they just had this gaze, this sort of blank gaze looking at these television sets, waiting literally to be purchased and abused, except for one girl. She was the only one not watching the children's cartoon. She was staring at us in our direction through the glass. And I don't know what I was seeing in her eyes. I don't know, because I'm just an observer. Was it trauma that I was seeing? Was it the fight or flight or freeze mode that I was seeing? Was it fight? I don't know, but I will never forget that stare in those eyes and her number. And her number was 146. Wow. And so even when we decided to start the organization and then naming the organization at one point, we kind of wanted to remember her. Yeah. But more than that, we wanted to remember that when we talk about issues and causes, and because you're so heavily involved as a church here in the city of New Haven in all kinds of justice issues, that it's really easy to lose sight of people's humanity by putting them under categories of people, right? Or these issues and causes. We talk about the homeless, the refugees, the immigrants, the poor, we put the in a category and we shove people under that. And I think we have a tendency to dehumanize people. We forget not only their humanity, but these are image bearers of God that we're talking about. And so for us, even naming the organization was to force us to remember every day that we're talking about individual human beings here. And it's much easier, at least for me, to fight for an individual than it is for large groups of people. And so, so out of that experience, I think it's a proverb somewhere that says, my eye affects my heart. And in that moment, my heart was affected and was like, okay, we got to do something about this. And so we started to educate ourselves, learn as much as we could. And we ended up, forming this organization, specifically dealing with what we saw at the time as gaps, which was caring for children. There's the investigators that do their thing, but then what happens? Because oftentimes recovery is a lifelong process. It's not just, you're all better now because you've been rescued. We love the Liam Neeson stories, right? Where it's just like, you go and do a rescue and everything's okay. It's like the hard work happens after that. And so looking at what that looks like, and then after doing that for years in Asia and then in the UK, and then we started doing it here, we started looking at the prevention piece of like, we have this bold vision statement, the end of child trafficking and exploitation. We can't stop that if we don't stop it from happening, we'll always be doing it. And so we felt like we got to do something about prevention. So that's when we started doing the prevention work. Wow.
That's, such a powerful story. And you've come to our church and shared, parts of that with us. And I think we've been moved locally. And I wonder for you, I don't think a lot of people have seen what you've seen, but we've heard stories, especially now, 20 something years later. Can you take me to that moment of being on the flight back? Like, what was going through your mind and your heart? Because I think it's easier to say, and then we started the organization. And of course you did. Like, you all did it. But I'd love to hear you say, what was that moment like, just flying back? Like, however many hours it was. Like, what was going through your mind? What was going through your heart?
It's a great question, man. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question. I'll go back a day before that. So the night that happened, I called my wife because after that night, we all walked back to the hotel in absolute silence. Like, we were just gutted. Like, what just happened? What did we just see? Right. And, as a believer, I used to take great comfort, and it would often be said to me, or I would even say it when I was in ministry, to comfort people. We're like, hey, we serve a God who never sleeps nor slumbers. Right. And that's comforting. That night completely twisted that around for me. I have a completely new understanding of why God doesn't sleep at night, right? Because I get to walk out of that brothel. But my understanding and the few things that I've learned about Jesus in the 40 years I've been following him is he is with the suffering. And so he doesn't leave there. He sees it all. He sees what happens. And that was gutting. And I remember calling my wife from the hotel room, and I'm like, trying to avoid and talking about how are the kids, and she's like, are you okay? Thank God I have a wife who is able to pierce right into that place, right? If she knows from thousands of miles away something's not right, she goes, are you okay? And that was it. I just it was like the dam broke. I mean, I just sobbed and couldn't talk. And she's like, this is going to change everything, isn't it?
Wow.
I'm like, I think this is going to change everything. And so, yeah, that was sort of what I carried onto that plane, and what we as friends carried onto that plane was just this determination of like, we've got to do something. But we were smart enough to know that we're not experts. I mean, I'm a drummer in a band.
Yeah.
Right. What am I going to do? And so we were looking at, what can we do? And so we hit the ground running of trying to figure that out, educating ourselves, learning as much as we possibly could. And it's so funny. I went to Barnes and Noble, and I spent days at Barnes and Noble reading through. Yeah, I was one of those guys that instead of buying the book, I actually nonprofit for dummies.
Yep.
Right. Like, how do you even do this?
Wow.
But we knew that there was a need. We've tried to figure out what can we do, and I think I often tell people that my expertise is knowing what I'm not an expert in and finding those people and bringing them into the equation. And so we've built the organization by hiring amazing people. I mean, the staff of Love 146 are just off the charts, top notch, and the expertise that each one carries. We have social workers. We just have amazing people that make up the organization.
That's incredible. And I think it's what you said last, the way that you were a student, and also the way that you knew I don't know everything. And I think sometimes when you look at an organization like yours, you might not think that was the first thing that was maybe like the genius of getting it done. But it sounds like that birthed so much because you were able to say what we have is a kind of passion from what we've seen, but other people have things they went to school for, degrees, and combining those things worked out. I don't know if that was something that you had in you just your whole life, but that's, I think, an understated thing that really makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've always, right from the beginning, because of exactly what you just identified, we didn't know what we were doing, and we were very much aware that we didn't. I think we've always had this posture as an organization from the very start of having a posture of being learners, which has been really interesting because that has also given us a seat at almost every table, right?
Wow.
Though we carry, a great depth of expertise now, I mean, because we've been doing this for 21 years, and we have amazing people, we still come to the table as learners, knowing that we don't know everything. And we also understand that we have this bold, audacious vision statement of ending this. We know we can't do that on our own. And so when we come to the table, we come not only carrying expertise now, but we still approach with this posture of being learners. And it's just opened a lot of doors for us through the years.
Yeah.
It's been good. It's the thinking thing, right? Of being able to, I had a lady in Cambodia years ago when we first started. She looks at me and she goes, "You know what your problem is as Americans?" And I sort of braced myself because you get this a lot when you travel. I thought, well, I could think of some things, but I know you're going to tell me. She goes, "You don't think. Instead, you react."
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's a pretty interesting observation. And Lee, talk to me more about that. And she goes, I think sometimes you see some human rights abuse happening in the world or something happening that you don't think is right or whatever. And instead of taking time to really think through solutions that will be effective and sustainable, you just react. And because you didn't put thought into your reaction, honestly, sometimes your reaction causes a lot more harm than good.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. I feel like somebody just laid a house on my shoulders of wow, whatever we do about this, we need to really be thoughtful. We need to have that posture of being learners and everything so that what we do is going to be effective and sustainable because kids deserve that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there's a saying that kind of goes around even in ministry is, ready, fire, aim. And it's like, wait, what order are we doing things in? And there's a sense that, man, we want to fix things so badly, but fixing things on our own doesn't always go well. Yeah. And I wonder for you, even in the first, years of Love 146, how did you not just continue being a learner, but learn from mistakes, learn from being in this huge, the vision statement you have is incredible and it's so bold. How did you not buckle under that, but instead find ways to, keep going and keep persevering?
Yeah, that's the thing is the mistakes, right? We have made mistakes and we recognize that even things that we did 20 years ago, we do differently now because we've learned. As our understanding increases, hopefully our actions could potentially be changed or whatever, and we become more effective. But I think Yeah, I mean, the organizational humility piece, right? It's just, I mean, this is one of the things that's just missing nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Like when's the last time you've seen somebody even like in a Senate hearing with humility? Right? Like there's always this, like, we were just talking about this earlier about the need to be right kind of thing of like, that's not as important to us as protecting children. So, and I think it's the recognition too, when we created the vision statement, like we just were like, what's our goal? And it was like no brainer, right? We want to stop this from happening. And so we've been called naive. We've been called idealistic, when you think about the numbers and how many people are being trafficked and all of that, it's just like, you really think this is going to stop? And we prefer not to. We don't think it's naive. We don't think it's idealistic. We think it's audacious.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's people of audacity that change the world, right? So, I mean, even like it's interesting because even the story of our founding, right, has shifted over the years, not the reality of what happened, but how that story is told, because we listened to survivors. Survivors gave us feedback on how we were telling the story, which was completely from an observer point of view. Yeah. And I used to make statement of, this is what I saw. This is what was happening. So what I saw is what was happening. And they were like, actually, you don't know what was happening in that girl that wore the number 146, right? I used to just say, hey, she had fight in her eyes. And they're like, how do you know that? How do you know that was fight? How do you know that wasn't just absolute trauma that you were looking? How do you know it wasn't this? And it was like, whew, and we took a step back and we sat down and we listened to survivors and teach us of like, this is why even the telling of that could be traumatic, and so I just think it's that we just don't know it all.
Yeah.
Right. And when we think we do, we're going to be proven wrong. And rather than waiting to be proven wrong, why don't I just like develop that posture of learning and humility now so that it could prevent maybe potential mistakes later on down the road. And we'll always make mistakes, but it's really important to learn from them.
This summer, Vineyard USA is hosting our national conference, Seed and Soil, in 2 locations, Denver, Colorado on June 17th through 20th, and Cincinnati, Ohio on July 15th through 18th. We hope that by offering 2 locations and dates, everyone, pastors, leaders, volunteers, even those just curious about the Vineyard, everyone will be able to find a time to join us. The conference will have specific programming for adults, youth, and kids, while we focus on cultivating healthy soil in our hearts and planting seeds for the future for all that God wants to do in us and in the Vineyard. Registration is now open with early bird pricing, so make sure to check out vineyardusa.org to learn more and register today.
One thing that just from being a supporter of yours and just knowing your organization and the people that work there, like the way you put humanity first is just so powerful. And there's something about, micro stories change us. Like the big issue, like you're saying, the big thing, we're appalled, we're shocked. But when we hear that story of just one person's life, and then we hear, oh, this other story, it's different, but it's a similar issue, then it's another story. I feel like you do so well to fight for keeping the humanity at the forefront when the issue itself almost repels us from thinking individually, partly because maybe we have to look in the mirror and say, we're an individual story too. What are we doing? And I don't know how you keep that fresh. I don't know how you keep anchoring that. Maybe it's just hearing from people and listening, like you're saying. But I can tell from someone that's known about you since 2007 or 8 to now, I mean, the way that you put people and individuals first to say, this is what we want to, center, I think is just really incredible.
It's one of our core values, right? What we call relentless advocacy, right?
Yeah.
That it's you hear a lot of buzzwords, buzz statements. So, we got to do what's in the best interest of the child. We actually do. Like it's not something we just. Sometimes you go to family court and everything, and you start wondering, wait. And nobody's talked about the child here. Yeah. I see a lot of people fighting for different things or whatever. And honestly, a lot of it has to do with another congregant in your church, Marilyn Murray, who heads up all of our communications. And she's that person, right, that sees humanity first. And so she's helped informed a lot. I mean, bottom line is that because the issue is so dark, we also understand that it's not the whole story.
Yeah.
Right. And I had a supporter one time with me visiting our safe home in the Philippines, and we spent the day playing with the kids, and it was just this, we just had a blast. And at the end of the day, she goes, man, I'm just so confused. This is not what I was expecting to see here.
Yeah.
She goes, these kids, they're just enjoying life and all of this. She goes, they're just like real children. And I was like, yep, that's because they are real children, right?
Yeah.
But we have this like expectation that the worst thing that's ever happened to you defines you now.
Yeah.
And this is who you are. But you're bigger than the worst thing that's ever happened to you, just as you're bigger than the worst thing you've ever done, right?
Yeah.
And so seeing the full picture of who a human being is really important to us. So we try to tell the whole story so so it's not just like, this is you.
Yeah. I love that. I just feel the hope of it all. I think humanity brings forth hope, and I can see that and sense that in what you're saying. One thing you said earlier, and during the youth ministry time, is that you faced burnout and you felt like, okay, I can't keep doing this. It's interesting that you tell the story then. And again, not that youth ministry is light, but the work you're doing just seems infinitely more complex. Maybe that's not true. How has that been in this mode, whether it's yourself in burnout or even just the staff that you're leading? Tell me more about that, please.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's another really good question. So obviously our heads are buried in some of the darkest stories imaginable day in and day out. So right out of the gate, we're just like, how do you, sustain? And for myself, I've always admired people that have been involved in some kind of movement for a long time. People dabble, people will jump into things or whatever. And being in human rights work, I meet burnt out, cynical ex-activists all the time, right? But then you see those that don't burn out, and you're like, what? Congressman John Lewis was like one of my heroes, right? Partly because of how long he stuck it out, and the feeling that he had to deal with at times of like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, and like, what is that? How do you stay in it right up until the dying breath, right? What does that look like? And I think in some ways it's looking to people like that it is possible. Yeah. I think for myself, my faith grounding is a huge thing. I think surrounding myself with people who are also in the same place. So when I'm in that place of like, man, I feel drained, I feel exhausted, there's others that carry the baton or can be like accountability of like, hey man, you need to take a break. You need to,
Yeah.
We have, our COO, Jennifer Franz at Love 146 is awesome with our staff, making sure that staff have that, self-care sort of like, make sure that you take time that you need to take to stay healthy. But the other thing is another one of our core values is what we call defiant hope, right? And so there's people that have heard me speak, or they'll see a video that I've done or whatever, and they're like, oh my gosh, I love your optimism, Rob. You're such a, it's just contagious. And I'm like, you don't know me, because the last thing I am is an optimist. Yeah. I've seen way too much to be an optimist, and I'm not anti-optimist. I like being around optimists, right? It's like it's encouraging.
Good for the soul.
But I think if you're not careful, I think sometimes optimism can be passive, or optimism can even move into like denial mode, right? Where, hey, it's bad, but everything's going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It's all going to work out, right? Yeah. That is not me. Defiant hope, I think, is a different thing. And we were very purposeful in adding the word defiant to it, because I feel like that's what hope looks like, where it's like things are bad, but I insist that that's not the end of the story. I insist that it could potentially change, and possibly change because of my action, me actually doing something about it. So it's not passive. There's action connected to it. And I love the word defiance, because most of my life, defiance has had this negative connotation.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times did I ever hear a school teacher call me defiant, right? My parents were so defiant, and all of that. Now that I've attached defiance to hope, it's paying off in spades, right?
Yeah.
It's an insistence, right? It's just like, this is not the whole story. And I insist that this hard thing or terrible thing can change, and I'm going to be a part of doing that. And so that and here's the crazy, beautiful thing. We're learning that from kids that we serve, right? For some of the kids that we work with, them waking up in the morning and choosing to live another day is an act of defiant hope. How can I not be participating in that kind of hope. So I think I'm in a different place now in my understanding of hope than I was when I was back in youth ministry, for sure. Yeah.
Wow. And I love just that thought of you're working with a population that when they get up, right, they're choosing something. Yeah. And you're thinking, okay, what am I choosing? Yeah. And asking yourself the same question. And it's the kind of putting yourself in an equal ground of, we all wake up. Now, what are we doing about it? Yeah. I think it's so profound. Let me ask you a question. You know, some of our listeners, they're people who lead churches, they're volunteers, probably get this question a lot. If they're listening to this and thinking, what can I do? Or what's something that I can do in my local church, my community, about child trafficking, about anti-trafficking, what would you say to them?
Obviously, there's so much more awareness now than there was when we first started. And so a lot of work has been done to like, hey, this is a thing. Like when we first started talking about this, in fact, I remember the first year, I think, maybe second year that we started, there was a thing that we did here at the New Haven Green where there was a thing that happened in Cambodia where there was a bunch of kids were rescued. It was like 80-something kids were part of a recovery operation. They were brought to a safe home. The very next day, the traffickers raided the safe home.
No.
Kidnapped all the kids and other kids that were there. There were 91 people altogether that were taken. And we heard that I don't know how we heard, but it was like, how is this not like major news? Like
news.
91 people kidnapped out of a safe home. Nobody knows about it, right? And so we're like, we need to raise awareness right here in our own city that this is something that happens in the world and something that we can do something about. So we went out to the Green to do this vigil for the 91. Yeah. And we had these signs, that just said 91 to get people to ask questions. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean? We were out here on the Green. We had these signs, and people were driving by honking. Where we had signs: "Stop the traffic, 91, stop the." And people were like, "Yeah, the traffic on 91 is horrible, 95 and 91." And it was like, "No, that's not the traffic that we're talking about." But that's what it was like back then, right? Now people know this is what's going on. I think a big thing is educating yourself, learning as much as you can. We have a ton of resources on our website for parents, for caregivers, for people to understand, hey, these are some practical things that you can do. Be aware that this is happening. We have resources, especially for parents and for kids, how to stay safe online. A lot of places where kids are being trafficked and exploited now is online. How do you keep your kids safe online? How do you understand what's going on? Kids put their vulnerabilities out there now for all the world to see, right? And the bottom line is that traffickers and people that want to exploit kids are looking for those vulnerabilities, and now those vulnerabilities are freely shared. So how do you deal with that? How do you work with that? And so there's a lot of resources that are available on our website that people can take a look at. Yeah,
and one other thing I just realized, some of the examples you used were global, international things. What was it like for you to see more and more that in your own backyard, even in Connecticut, this was happening? I feel like one that must have been an eye-opening but also a humbling thing. And then it seems like, just from my peeking into the organization, you all have done that. You've cared about things across the pond, all around the world, but also locally. Can you talk about, one, just how that works, and also how you all kind of adapt it as an organization?
Yeah, I think it's one of those classic things, right? Of just thinking, when you hear about something happening in the world, it's like, oh, this is something that happens over there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because our experience with it, like physically, first happened over there. That's sort of like our assumption too. This is something that happens in places like Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe and all of that. So, but then when we started again educating ourselves and learning as much as we could about it, it's like, whoa, this is something that actually happens here too. But then even that, we think, oh, this is something that just happens like in the cities and stuff. Like, it's like, no, this is something that happens in every neighborhood, in every community where there's vulnerability. You're going to have people that will take advantage of that vulnerability. So it was a bit of looking back and thinking, wait, this is something that has to be addressed, not just overseas and over there, but over here. I think that's the way it is with a lot of things. And this is sort of the thing that I saw also in church for a long time. It's like, it's easier to go on a missions trip over there than it is to actually love my neighbor who lives on my street, right? It's just like, why is that? I don't even know why that is, but that seems to be a thing.
It's real. It's real.
It's real. So that was our story, right? Same thing. It's like, whoa, this is happening, here as well. And so that's, right here in the state of Connecticut. Our survivor care program here is only 10 years old, but we've provided direct services to, I think it's about 850 kids right here in the state of Connecticut who are either confirmed or suspected victims of trafficking. And Connecticut's just this little sliver of a state. And in every county, it's not just in, places like Bridgeport or New Haven or whatever, but in Fairfield as well and wherever. So, definitely an aha moment for us too.
Yeah.
Just like, wait, why is this?
Yeah. And I love that story too, that because of the timeline of your work, you have people all the way across the world with that defiant hope themselves, and their stories now help, kids and youth in a place like Connecticut, as you learned with them and as they taught you, now you apply those lessons here. Yeah. And it's just one of those things, you never know what you're starting when you decide to join in something or say yes, or just even see like what's happening. And all of a sudden there's so much, in this case, good that happens. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think it works the other way too.
Totally.
But this one's good. Yeah. This has been such a good time for you just to share with us. And I'm wondering, if there's a prayer that, Vineyard churches, pastors could be praying for 1146, for this vision to end child sex trafficking and child trafficking in general, what would you want us to be praying for?
Yeah, I think this is another really good question. I think there's the obvious things, right? Yeah. Pray for kids for the recovery process, because trauma is heavy and a really hard thing, and oftentimes, again, a lifelong journey. So just praying for kids who have had these kinds of things happen to them. I think praying for our staff, our workers that are immersed into the lives of these children day in and day out, for stamina, for defiant hope to stay defiant and hopeful, I think is really important. And I think another aspect too that I think is really important and often neglected is to pray for a conviction on those that would take advantage of. It's still something that I can't quite wrap my head around, that would take advantage of the vulnerabilities of a child, that there'd be a conviction there. And in fact, going back to the question you asked before about what can churches do, I often share, especially with men, I have, when I speak, especially in churches, oftentimes I'll have women come up that'll be like, oh man, can you adopt these children? Can there's this like, compassion for these kids, but I'll have, usually almost every time, I'll have somebody in a church, guy, come up and be like, I've got skills, right? In other words, like the ladies thing, like I want to break down a brothel door and stuff. And I'm like, well, that's probably not the most helpful thing that you can do. But if you really want to do something helpful, become a mentor to a boy who needs a mentor. Become a big brother, join Big Brothers and become a big brother, where you can pour into the lives of young boys that are missing some sort of role in their life of a father figure or somebody that represents something different than what they've experienced or whatever. And oftentimes I see this glazed over, because that takes work, man. That takes sacrifice. That takes giving of yourself more than just busting down a brothel door. And so that would be something really practical. But yeah, prayers in those places, and then for legislators to make good decisions when it comes to protecting children would be also something to pray for.
Yeah, I love just the complexity of those prayers, but also how straightforward they are, right? Yeah. You're not just praying for an end all the way out there. Yeah. You're praying for real kids right now. You're praying for real conviction right now that would change the lives of people that are seeking to exploit that vulnerability. Praying for people not to just be the hero, but actually do what they can locally, so the problems don't even happen because people's lives are changed. And then legislation, that people in power actually do the righteous things that we want people to do.
Yeah, and the heroes are not us.
Yep,
they're kids.
Yeah,
I mean, these are the heroes. We get to be witnesses to their incredible incredible journeys,
Yeah.
and it's such a privilege. So, yeah.
Yeah. Can I pray for you and pray for
Absolutely,
Love 146
please.
as we close?
Yep.
God, I pray for Love 146 and for Rob. There's a verse that comes to mind that's actually kind of strange, but it's a deferred dream makes the heart sick. And what I recognize in being with Rob and being with Love 146 is they're dreamers. And I pray, God, Thanksgiving, that they've dreamt so much and really put thought and work and prayer into making those dreams come true. But I know that there's more that they want. There's more that they're looking to see, both here in Connecticut, in the States, and abroad. And so, Lord, I pray that you would continue to allow them to dream big with that divine hope, that they wouldn't dream in a way that feels foolish or reckless, but actually in a way that's grounded in the good things that you're doing. So give them that real hope so their hearts are strong. God, I also pray for this defiance to be in everyone in the organization, in every kid, in everyone who hears this podcast. God, we pray for that defiant hope right now. And God, we also pray for people who have power to do what they need to do. So vulnerability is met not with exploitation, but with care and concern and compassion. That everyone who is vulnerable would actually get needs met instead of having new needs arise because of exploitation. So we pray an end to that. And for the people in power, even if it's just people listening to this podcast that have some ability to do something, for them to do what you are calling them to do, to step into your righteousness, to step into service, and to protect those who are currently finding themselves vulnerable. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Rob, I'm so grateful for the time we spent together. So grateful that we're still in the same city. And for everyone listening to this podcast, know it is from New Haven with love. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Okay. Vineyard, we'll see you soon next week. Take care.
As we celebrate our 50-year anniversary in the Vineyard, if you're interested in learning more about Vineyard history, there are plenty of resources for you. Check out our show notes for links to books, YouTube videos, and more to learn about Vineyard history and identity. And make sure to keep listening to the podcast this year for stories of Vineyard churches throughout the year.